This year, KYE welcomes the Beatles back to San Francisco in a mammoth Candlestick Park spectacular.
Welcome. I'm RJ, and you have found Classic Rock Facts. This is the place where we celebrate all things classic rock. Subscribe for new releases, and check out our library of features on the history of the Beatles. We also have stories on Led Zeppelin, The Who, Kate Bush, and iconic concerts of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're coming up on the 59th anniversary of the last time the Beatles played a live concert. And before we get too far, I do realize the 1969 rooftop performance was live, but it wasn't an actual paid concert. The last Beatles concert took place on Monday night, August 29, 1966, at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, California. Candlestick Park was a 43,000-seat stadium that was home to the San Francisco Giants baseball team. It had been just 2 years and 6 months since the Beatles arrived in the U.S. and had appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. What caused the most popular band in the world to suddenly stop performing live? Was it the incessant touring? Was it the lack of quality sound equipment? Was Beatlemania starting to wear thin? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. Before we get to that last concert, let's go backwards in Beatle time. When the Beatles walked off the stage for the last time, John and Ringo were 25 years old, Paul was 24, and George was 23. I find that incredible. The same 4 guys who had sung I Wanna Hold Your Hand would now be telling fans to turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Under the direction of manager Brian Epstein, the Beatles had a repeating yearly cycle, consisting of making a feature film, recording and releasing a new album, and then embarking on a live concert tour to promote the movie and album. They take a little break and start the cycle all over again. This had been a winning formula in 1964 and 1965. That mindset began to change in late 1965 due to a few different factors. One important reason is that in the spring of 1965, John and George took LSD for the first time. Ringo and Paul took it for the first time in August of 1965 in Los Angeles during the 1965 tour. I have a video in the Classic Rock Facts library that goes into further detail about the Beatles' use of LSD. Needless to say, lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, does affect the brain, leading to altered perception, mood, and thought processes. This mind-expanding drug obviously also expanded the song-writing boundaries of the boys as well. Another important factor is that the Beatle machine as a whole was proven to be more than a flash in the pan. The Beatles were making significant money from record sales, touring, and merchandise. Ringo and George earned $2 million in 1966. John and Paul each earned $3.3 million. After reinvestment into business ventures and the sky-high English tax rate of 83% for their tax bracket, the boys reached financial independence. This meant they could now do whatever they want. In the spring of 1966, when Brian announced it was time to film their annual feature film, the boys said no. They didn't want to make another movie. The 3 months in the spring of 1966 that were blocked off for a movie had now become the longest period of free time since 1962. They recorded the album Revolver in April, May, and June of 1966. Paperback Writer and Rain were released as singles on Memorial Day weekend in 1966. The Yesterday and Today collection was released in the U.S. on June 15th. Next up was the annual tour. This time it was going to be West Germany, Japan, the Philippines, then a brief stop in India to shop, and then back to England for about a month. The Beatles' album Revolver would then be released on August 5th, followed by the 18-day tour of the US and Canada. Today, second, third, and fourth generation Beatle fans have begun to consider Revolver the best Beatle album, a place long held by Sgt. Pepper. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Brian Epstein had booked larger stadium-type venues for 1966. But here's the rub. The most popular band in the world did not even employ their own sound engineers for their tours. However, 1966 did finally have major changes in Beatles' concert sound. The fans were still screaming like before, but now instead of 17,000 people indoors, it was now twice as many in an open-air stadium. They wanted sound quality like at EMI Studios, but live concert sound reinforcement of this magnitude was in its infancy. This caused friction for the boys who just wanted to be heard. The 1966 US tour set was till just 30 minutes. They only played 10 songs. Even though they were promoting their new album, Revolver, they did not play any songs off of that album. They stated that the songs were too complex to perform live. Another factor in the 1966 tour vibe was John's infamous Jesus comment. He had made an off-the-record comment to a journalist about how popular the Beatles were in comparison to religion. This comment created backlash among Christians who misunderstood his comment. Brian considered canceling the tour. Radio stations protested, and John was forced to make a public apology for his comment when the Beatles arrived in Chicago for their first show of the tour. The touring, the sound, the angry fans. This whole thing was becoming not fun anymore. The one thing that was still fun was writing and recording new music on their terms, on their schedule, at their house. After shows in Japan, the Beatles experienced the worst engagement of their careers. Brian had booked 2 concerts in one day in Manila at Rizal Memorial Stadium. The 3 p.m. show was 30,000. The 8:30 show was 50,000. One fan wrote, "The sound was terrible, the Beatles were terrific." After not attending a reception at the palace of President Ferdinand Marcos, the snubbed administration did everything they could to screw the Beatles over. They had removed all the hotel security. They had no assistance at the airport. Beatle roadie Mal Evans was physically assaulted by Philippine military officers at the airport. And finally, Brian was forced to pay taxes on the money earned from the concerts. The Beatles took a loss from the Philippine stopover. Here are the Beatles describing what happened in their own words.
To Manila back in the 60s, the Beatles on a tour, and we did the concert.
I hated the Philippines.
As soon as we got there, it was bad news.
One of those places where you sort of knew they were waiting for a fight, you know.
Would you go to Manila again, George?
Oh, no, I didn't even want to go that time.
Me too.
No, because we'd heard that it was a terrible place anyway.
When we got to Manila, the situation was entirely different, but in its own way, more frightening.
The next morning, we were in bed, and somebody knocked on our door, the hotel suite, saying, "Come on, you're supposed to be at the palace." And we said, "No, we're not."
We did the show, and I didn't know personally, I didn't know anything about that Madame Marcos had invited us to dinner.
What happened there was that Imelda Marcos, the First Lady, gathered together a number of the aristocracy, children, and these kids were waiting for the Beatles to be brought to them.
It's indeed a great honour, but it's our day off, so we can't go. And we're very firm about that, because we don't get many days off. We're not stuffing in some sort of royal reception.
We turned the television on, and there it was, this big palace with lines of people, and the guy saying, "Well, they're still not here yet." But we were never supposed to be there. And so what they did was they said, "Beatles snub first family," which I'm glad we did. See, even in those days we had taste.
So then things started to get really weird, you know, come on, get out of bed, get packed, we're getting out of here. We really had no help, and we got downstairs like one motorbike. You know, after this huge motorcade brought us in, there was just this one guy.
We got there and we got put into the transit lounge. And then we got pushed around from one corner of the lounge to another, you know.
I was thinking, God, you know, this is it. We're going to get busted.
We got to the airport, and our road managers had a lot of trouble trying to get the equipment in because the escalator's been turned off.
It's now the summer of 1966, and the Beatles have begun to buck the system. They veto making another feature film, which was set to be A Talent for Loving in 1966. They can't get enough concert sound to fill the massive stadiums Brian has booked. The incident in the Philippines had caused the boys to consider pulling the plug on any future tours, even though Brian was actively booking dates for a 1967 U.S. tour. Once the tour began, the Beatles faced protests and death threats as they crossed the U.S. The issue with the concert sound was beginning to change thanks to the Hanley Sound Company. Bill Hanley had done concert sound for Bob Dylan when he went electric at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1965. He had also done the sound for the Beatles' 1965 Shea Stadium show. Hanley Sound would quickly become the leader in live concert sound, and within 3 years Hanley provided sound for the Rolling Stones, the Texas Pop Festival, and Woodstock. But for the Beatles, it was too little too late. The Beatles' tour juggernaut crossed the U.S. over 18 days. By the time the last show of the tour approached, The boys sensed this would be the end of the concert cycles. And the end it was. The Beatles never had a live tour again. The last date of the Beatles' 1966 tour was the Candlestick show. They had felt like caged animals on display, and looking at the photos from that night, I can see why. The stage was set back 250 feet away from the fans, and a double chain-link fence encircled them. They were removed from the stadium after the show in an armored car. John had brought his camera and taken selfies of the band, knowing it was over. Paul asked a staff member to record the show for him. Ringo is shown with a big smile on his face as he leaves the stage, and George said, "I'm not a Beatle anymore," on the plane back to LA. Here is a statement Paul had made on that same plane ride just minutes after the Candlestick Park show had ended. Before we go back to that last show, here are two interesting classic rock facts not everyone knows. When the Beatles were backstage at Candlestick Park, they sat at a table chilling out with Joan Baez. There were markers there for autograph purposes, so the boys drew on the tablecloth as they waited for the show to start. That tablecloth, with the doodles made by the Beatles, recently sold at auction for $88,575. Here are some of the doodles. Pretty cool item for any Beatle collection.
The Beatles are coming to Candlestick. Yes, KYA welcomes the Beatles back to San Francisco.
It's bigger because it's in Candlestick Park with thousands of good seats so everyone can see.
It's better because the special Beatles sound system means you'll hear everything the Beatles sing and say.
Don't be left out as KYA welcomes the Beatles to the final appearance of their spectacular American tour.
Monday, August 29th, 8 p.m.
Tickets are now available through KYA at just $5, $6, and $7, including all handling charges.
Send your check or money order to Beatles, KYA San Francisco, with a stamped, self-addressed envelope.
Join KYA and the Beatles in the most fabulous show you'll ever see.
Did you know that Beatle manager Brian Epstein was not present for the last concert? That's right. Brian had built the group from the ground up and in just 4 years had created the most popular musical group in history. While the boys were playing the last chord of the last song of the last show of the last tour, Brian was 400 miles away in Los Angeles looking for his missing briefcase. Why miss such an important event over a briefcase? Well, turns out the briefcase was actually taken by one of Brian's ex-lovers. It also contained a number of incriminating items, including illegal pills, explicit love letters, steamy Polaroid photos of his young male friends, and more than $20,000 in cash skimmed from concert proceeds to be handed out as a bonus to the band. Sadly, Brian Epstein would be found dead just 1 year later of an accidental overdose of pentobarbital at the age of 32. Rest in peace, Brian. Brian Epstein's missing briefcase from 1966, minus the contents, was sold at auction recently for $3,438. It's hard to believe that just 90 days later, the Beatles would be recording Strawberry Fields Forever, and John would visit a London art gallery and meet a young Japanese artist named Yoko Ono. In my opinion, when the Beatles left the stage that night after finishing Long Tall Sally, the Beatles went from black and white to color. I wonder how many of the 29,000 fans who attended the Candlestick show are still with us. There were 10,000 unsold seats that night. If we only knew the significance of that last concert. And now on with the show. Here are the Beatles at Candlestick.
kick against us. One over
The next song is called Paperback Writer.
Well, they sure are warmed up. Wow. Well, I guess the first thing for us to do is get back over to that girl who invited us to return and listen to her being hysterical. Excuse me.
much, everybody.